15 March 1965. Halle, Saale, Bezirk-Halle, German Democratic Republic. A middle-aged clerk bends over a lined notebook and writes a line that could not be spoken aloud. In my life, truth has always been something I hand to someone else in an envelope. He blots the ink. He closes the cover. He returns to the official paper on his desk. The report is for a security officer from the Ministry for State Security. It is the same handwriting he used 2 decades earlier for a precinct office of the Geheime Staatspolizei. A change in letterhead. A continuity of function. He is Karl R. He works in housing allocation and citizens' petitions. He files, he tallies, he remembers. 8 May 1945. The war ends. It does not finish. Halle in spring carries the smell of Brit dust and wet ash. Photographs in municipal collections show women atop rubble heaps passing stones hand to hand. The Trümmerfrauen, the women of debris. A Wehrmacht convoy lies abandoned on the Merseburger Straße. A boy pushes a pram with a bed frame inside. The destroyed market hall is a wind tunnel that whistles through broken glass. American troops enter first. They issue orders. Curfew at 8. Surrender all weapons. White armbands on those authorized to dispense food. Occupation reports from the Halle Kommandantur, declassified decades later, list the instructions in staccato lines. No gatherings, no radios, no travel after dusk. Then another entry on 1 July. American forces withdraw. Soviet units arrive in accordance with inter-Allied agreements. Red Army trucks grind over the cobbles. The first sign to go up is the Kommandatur. The first word learned anew is Prikaz. Fear travels faster than the trucks. Men who wore uniforms disappear. Party pins get tossed into the sale. Mothers burn photographs in ovens no longer lit for bread. The arithmetic of scarcity begins at once. Rations get counted. Calories get reduced to numbers on chalkboards. A standard adult receives 1,040 calories a day in the worst months, sometimes less. The hunger winter of 1946–47 is a mathematician's ledger of heat and hunger. Days at -15, coal scrounged from rail sidings, potatoes frozen in fields. People barter. A shirt for a pound of lard. A cigarette for a sack of flour. Cigarettes become money. Old men who have never smoked tuck cigarettes into their wallets like travelers' checks. Karl is 34 in 1945. He's a bookkeeper by habit and training. He comes from a family of clerks. Not poor, not important. He likes forms. He knows where information goes. He has a wife. He has a son taken by the Wehrmacht, missing somewhere east of the Oder. He cannot say which loss is heavier, the loss of a child or the loss of a child or the loss of a usable past. His pre-war file in the police station reads, reliable. The file is thin. In 1942, the first time he placed truth in an envelope, he addressed it to Staatspolizeistel Halle. He wrote that a colleague told a joke about a speech about the softness of Berliners under bombs. He noted the time, the room, the exact words as he remembered them. He signed with a clipped initial. He did not go to the arrest. He did not ask questions later. He told himself that he had kept order in a disorderly time. He told himself that he had protected himself. He ate dinner and said nothing. There were many like him. Gestapo case files, sampled in police archives and summarized in post-war research, show a system built less on omniscience than on the mathematics of voluntary offerings. Germany had a bureaucracy of denunciation that did not require a detective to know your living room. It needed neighbors. It needed clerks who liked the neutrality of paper. It needed the arithmetic of fear, advantage, and ideology. In this arithmetic, a man's pride could equal another man's arrest. The diary of a Halle schoolteacher holds a sentence that historians write around like a thorn. "I tell the truth, and I sleep well," she writes in 1943 after denouncing a shopkeeper who withheld ration coupons. Which truth? Which sleep? In May 1945, a different truth arrives. It arrives with the bodies opened up at Buchenwald and the images clipped into Allied intelligence summaries. It arrives with displaced persons walking the roads. On the Halle Market Square, foreign laborers with OST patches on their coats camp with rolled blankets and aluminum pots. They sing in languages the locals don't understand, then fall silent when soldiers approach. Karl stands at the edge of the group one morning. He holds an empty kettle. He watches a boy of 12 stir a pot of soup with a stick. He reads a sign in Cyrillic script without understanding a letter. The closest he gets to comprehending is a smell. Cabbage. A tinny smell of iron pots. Someone has scrounged horse meat. He is hungry. They are hungry. They arithmetic of hunger has no ideology. A British officer's report from another town, filed with the files now in the Bundesarchiv, captures the scene in lines without adjectives. DP camp established at edge of town. Population approximately 6,500. Jews from Poland and Hungary primarily. Health fare, security concerns minimal. German population advised to avoid provocation. Provocation requires more than hunger. It requires memory. That memory arrives slowly. It arrives at cinemas in mandatory newsreels that show corpses bulldozed into pits. It arrives at the charred fence posts of an abandoned subcamp where school children are taken by teachers who whisper. It arrives in whispers that no one says to a microphone. "We did not know," people say. "How could we know?" others say evenly. "We knew enough." Truth becomes a commodity measured out in drips and disclaimers. Denazification begins. It begins differently in different zones. In the American and British zones, a questionnaire arrives in the mail. The Fragebogen. 133 questions. Did you ever join the NSDEAB, the SA, the SS, the NSFK, the NSFK, the NSKK, the Hitlerjugend? Did you sign petitions? Did you write for a newspaper? Did you attend training? It is a test with no right answers and penalties that no one can calculate. The Spruchkammer system sorts the millions: major offenders, offenders, lesser offenders, followers, exonerated. The words feel precise, the practice is not. In the US zone, roughly 13 million are screened, roughly 3.5 million pass through hearings. Only a small percentage are classified as majors. The majority become followers. Paper restores the right to work. Paper creates the appearance of closure. Allied memoranda show the shift by 1948. The math of stability overtakes the arithmetic of guilt. Factories must run. Engineers must be allowed to engineer. The occupation authorities look at a nation of shopkeepers, mechanics, and doctors and calculate. Who must be punished for justice? Who must be spared for bread? In the Soviet zone where Halle sits, denazification looks like something else. Antifa committees in workplaces compile lists. The NKVD runs special camps at former concentration camp sites. Sachsenhausen becomes Special Camp 7. Buchenwald becomes Special Camp 2. Detainees include party officials, policemen, landowners, priests. Arrests are quick. Interrogations are firm. Trials, when they come, are brief. The German communists who survived Moscow do not need long to compute the arithmetic of revenge and deterrence. A man like Karl is invisible in this high-level accounting. He did not wear a uniform. He did not hold a title beyond clerk. He fills out his own questionnaire in summer 1946 for the German Entnazifizierungskommission of the district. He writes in a neat hand. Karl R. Geb, 1911. Mitgliedschaften, keine oder unbedeutend. NSDAP, Aufnahmeeintrag, 1937, abgelehnt. SA, keine. Beschäftigung, Stadtverwaltung, Abteilung Ernährung. He does not list the envelope addressed to the Staatspolizei. There is no line asking for it. There is no evidence. He adds a sentence that appears in thousands of files. Ich war nur Mitläufer. I was only a follower. The commission stamps. Mitläufer. He keeps his job. The mathematics of guilt now divides by utility. Who can be used? Who is dispensable? It is not clean. It is not fair. It is the method a society uses when it has to balance the books while the roof is collapsing. Displacement begins as an ongoing wave, not a single tide. 12 to 14 million Germans leave or are forced from homes east of the Oder-Neisse line. Silesia, East Prussia, Pomerania. The numbers are precise in Allied reports and unspeakable in kitchen talk. People arrive in Westphalian towns already blown apart by explosives. They come to places like Kassel and Hildesheim and Lübeck, dragging sacks. They come to small villages in Bavaria where the cow barns are sturdier than the houses. They come to East German towns like Werdau and Grimma as well, labelled Umsiedler, resettlers, in a euphemism that smooths a sharp edge. The arithmetic of rooms becomes a politics of doors. A family of 4 in a 2-room flat becomes a family of 8 when cousins arrive. A municipal housing office issues entries in a Wohnungsbuch. Residents are counted like calories. Square meters are weighed like loaves. In Karl's office, forms pile up. A woman from Königsberg with twin boys asks for a larger room because the ceiling leaks. A miner's widow from Halle says, "The men at the yard keep breaking the lock to steal wood." The Housing Allocation Regulation of 1945 is a thin booklet that gives officials like him authority to pry into homes. It is another kind of occupation. The language is precise. The practice is improvisation. Tension gets folded into the everyday. There is a note in an oral history from a small town outside Leipzig. They came with nothing and still wanted the best bed. Mother told me not to be cruel and to remember that God punished pride. Then she cried for 3 days because our plates were gone. In West Germany, the expellees become a voting bloc. They form associations. They carry keys to doors they will never open again. They tell stories centered on the mathematics of loss. In East Germany, they become new citizens in a new state that says it has solved the fascist problem by removing classes, landowners, and industrialists. The language is healing and hardening at once. Whatever the zone, a person like Karl works the longer arithmetic, small grievances, small surrenders. He drafts letters with the phrase, "Ich bitte Verständnis." I ask for understanding. Displaced persons remain near German towns longer than the locals expect. The camps are cities of transit with structures of permanence. At Belsen, the British establish a DP camp where survivors marry, publish newspapers, and debate Zionism under tarpaulin roofs. At Landsberg, the Americans run a camp where courts convene for displaced persons and also convene for accused SS men. At Halle, smaller camps sit at the edges. Karl passes by one weekly on his way to the ration depot. He does not go inside. He keeps to the road. He carries an empty bicycle basket that he hopes to fill with something like sugar. Contact with victims creates the most complicated arithmetic of all. Blame is indivisible. Suffering is not a contest. Germans see hungry survivors. Survivors see Germans with roof beams and rations. There is no equation that balances where every variable is loss. A letter from a German woman in the American zone to her sister in the Soviet zone, preserved in a family trunk and later donated to a regional archive, reads, "We saw the film. I have never seen so many dead. I cannot eat meat now. But the children are hungry and we must. Please send any extra coupons." The Polish woman opposite yells that we should die. Perhaps she is right. I am tired. Hunger makes memory one more scarce resource. The hunger winter of 1946-47 bites into East and West. The mathematics of cold is merciless. 12 degrees below zero for days. A coal train that does not arrive because locomotives freeze in sidings. People go on hamsterfahrten, hamster journeys to the countryside to barter for potatoes. In urban memoirs, one sees sledges loaded with briquettes pulled by children. In police blotters, one sees arrests for taking coal from a pile. Karl's office manages ration cards. He knows the logic. He does not like the logic. Heavy laborers receive more. Mothers with small children get separate allocations for milk when there is milk. Bureaucracy can be a shield. It can also be a blade. He tells himself that he does not choose. He tells himself that the form chooses. In June 1948, the Western zones introduce a new currency. The Deutsche Mark arrives with the smell of fresh ink and a sound like relief. The black market collapses overnight in the West. People pour into shops with ration cards in one hand, new notes in the other. Shelves fill with goods that had been invisible. The Marshall Plan shipments begin. Crates marked USA arrive. Flour, dried eggs, tin can labels in English. An occupation report lists items down to socks and tractors. The West German miracle begins not with a miracle but with arithmetic, capital, policy, labor. In the East, the Soviets strip factories as reparations and also rebuild others. Soviet-owned corporations, SAGs, manage dozens of enterprises. Land is redistributed. Big estates are broken. People like Karl see new slogans on old walls. Junkerland in Bauernhand. Junkerland into peasants' hands. It has the right ring. It has hard implementations. The Communist Party becomes the Socialist Unity Party through a fusion that is less fusion than takeover. On 8 February 1950, the Ministry for State Security is founded, the Stasi. The form is new. The function is familiar. A system of surveillance that asks ordinary citizens to become nodes in a network. Karl's Gestapo envelope sits in his memory like a stone in a drawer. The drawer is closed. He works in the new administration. He signs letters. Mit sozialistischem Gruß. He attends trainings where men in grey suits speak of vigilance. A young officer with a cheerful face and a crisp collar comes to his desk one afternoon in late 1951. The officer's report in the Stasi files, accessed decades later, uses the usual phrasing. Der Kandidat A. Karl Geb, 1911, Tätigkeitsbereich Wohnungsamt, politisch unauffällig, vertrauenswürdiger, eindruckswürdiger Eindruck, Zugang zu Informationen des Wohnungswesens, Möglichkeiten der Nutzung, Berichterstattung, überfindlich, negative Elemente, kriminelle Elemente, Kontakte nach West-Berlin, Vorschlag, Anwerbung als inoffizieller Mitarbeiter. The officer asks for a talk. He does not shout. He speaks quietly. He says, "You know this city. You work with people. You can help the workers and peasant state." He does not mention the past. He does not need to. Karl says yes. He says yes because he is afraid to say no. He says yes because it feels like what he always does, placing truth in an envelope and giving it to someone who needs it indexed. He signs a paper. He receives a cover name. I.M. Buchhalter. Bookkeeper. It is maybe a joke, or maybe not. He writes his first report about a man planning to leave for the West. He writes that a co-worker often goes to church. He writes that a woman speaks of her brother being better off in Wiesbaden. His tone is precise. He dates every entry. He lists time and place. He reports a joke told in a break room about a shortage of soap. He writes, "Mood in the office, downcast due to lack of fat." It reads like a weather report. The mathematics of self-justification is quick. He sees himself as a statistician of moods. He tells himself he's preventing worse by providing facts. He tells himself that if something must be reported, better that he report it accurately. It is the logic of the bookkeeper: if the numbers are correct, you have done the job. That people are numbers is the unexamined premise. 17 June 1953. Workers' strike. Across East German cities, men walk out of factories. They march past office windows chanting slogans that have the cadence of pay demands and the grammar of revolt. Wir fordern freie Wahlen. We demand free elections. Karl stands at the second-floor window of his building and watches the trucks arrive. The Stasi files for this day are thick. The reports begin as observation and end as fear. The Soviet tanks come, and the strike ends with gunshots and arrests. Later, comrades will call it a fascist putsch. They will say the West funded it. The memory of tanks does not care what the printed line says. Karl writes a report. He writes that the man in room 14 spoke sympathetically of the strikers. He writes that the typist on the third floor seemed to have hostile negative moods. There is no record of what happened to them after. Some were fired, some were sent to prison, some were only warned. The arithmetic of punishment is calculated elsewhere. He hands in his envelope. The next years are ordinary. That is how a surveillance state survives, ordinary days. The wall goes up on 13 August 1961. He receives a map of new checkpoints. His reports mention fewer relatives visiting from the West. He buys shoes with ration coupons because rubber is scarce. He takes his wife to the cinema and watches a film about anti-fascist resistance. He nods at the right parts. His son is still missing. He hears of the West's Wirtschaftswunder. He reads of Wiederaufbau and industrial output. He hears that Adenauer is chancellor, and that men who wore different uniforms now sit at desks again. He reads about a law, the 131er Gesetz, restoring pensions and offices to former civil servants. He writes in his private notebook that justice has many addends and a small sum. He writes nowhere that the East uses former Nazis too when it needs skills. The Stasi recruits from habit and from convenience. It recruits men like him because men like him slide easily from obedience into service. A bestial memo from the 1990s counts the former party members in the ranks. The numbers do not shock. They confirm what observation already suspected. The mathematics of regimes is addition, not division. The numbers carry over. The numbers carry over. Schoolbooks in the 1950s carry simple lessons. In the West, for years, the emphasis is on German suffering from bombing and expulsion. Photographs of destroyed Cologne. Chapters on hardship. Only later do the books tilt the lens to victims of German acts. In the East, the story is cleaner. The state defeated fascism by building socialism. Anti-fascism is the founding myth. It places guilt elsewhere, on monopoly capitalists, on imperialists, on the West. People teach these stories to their children because children must be taught something. The arithmetic of public memory is the easiest of all. It always reduces to the bluntest terms that do the least damage to the present. Karl files. The Ministry for State Security files his filings. His handlers praise his punctuality. They note he is modest and reliable. He receives small gifts at anniversaries, a fountain pen, a book of poetry, a voucher. He does not ask for more. He does not join the party. He avoids that arithmetic. It is the last boundary he defends. It is the last boundary he defends. The contact with victims does not end in 1945. It continues in whispers and reappearances. A man he denounced the first time to the Gestapo returns from a camp thin as a war ruler. He passes Karl on the street without a word. Perhaps he does not recognize him. Perhaps he does. The Stasi has no file on that meeting. There is no record of their two bodies in the same street endpoint. Not everything is archived. He writes in his private notebook a sentence that could be a confession or a puzzle. Everyone says we did what we had to do. I cannot count the weight of had to. The mathematics of guilt has no encompassing formula. It changes with weather and payroll. Meanwhile, in the West, Allied intelligence reports note the progression of denazification to renazification of civil offices. A British colonel writes concisely in 1950, "Objective of denazification transformed into objective of administrative continuity." In the East, party memos insist on vigilance against former fascists. They also recommend hiring a former Gestapo technician to operate wiretaps because he has useful experience. Both sides use what they inherited. Both sides deny parts of themselves. An occupation report from 1947 in the American zone describes the black market as if it were a weather system. Bakery goods diverted from ration channels to illegal trade estimated at 30%. The cigarette currency remains in the West until hard currency stabilizes. In the East, goods circulate by acquaintance and Beziehungen. A plumber knows a mechanic knows a nurse. Karl uses his position to get a cast-iron stove part sooner than the queue allows. He tells himself it does not matter. The arithmetic of need says, take what you can, give what you must. The records mention a meeting in 1955 where Karl's handler instructs him to report on the mood of expellees resettled in Halle. The report uses the beyond ideology phrase unsatisfied due to living conditions. It includes a note about a man who complains about being assigned to a factory job beneath his training. It includes the usual warning about political unreliability. Karl writes it in the same steady hand as his request to the housing office for glass to replace a broken window. He writes fewer sentences in his private notebook. He is careful. He keeps it in the false bottom of a wooden drawer. He writes not opinions but balances. Number of envelopes delivered, 1942-1944, 7. Number of reports delivered, 1952-1965, too many to count. He writes the line in March 1965 that opened this account. He writes the line in March 1965 that opened might bleed. On 21 July 1969, the FRG passes a law adjusting limitation periods for murder, pushing the time frame for prosecution of Nazi crimes further. It matters to prosecutors. It does not touch a man like Karl. He lives in a state that claims the problem is solved, not only by verdicts but by ideology. He remains a small functionary in a large machine that tells him he is a necessary gear. He prefers necessity to judgment. In 1970, a delegation of schoolchildren from Halle visits Buchenwald. The guide tells them that fascism was a tool of monopoly capital and that the socialist state is immune. The children listen. They read plaques. They feel a chill, not from politics but from the wind on the Ettersberg Hill. One boy asks his grandfather that evening whether he knew. The grandfather says, everyone knew something. No one knew everything. It is an honest lie. The Ministry for State Security continues to gather. It counts letters. It catalogues whispers, files balloon. Operative procedures are opened on men who read forbidden poetry, on women who write to West German magazines, on boys who paint slogans on walls. The arithmetic of suspicion expands by powers of 10. The more one counts, the more there is to count. A row in an index becomes a page, becomes a book, becomes a basement. Karl grows older. His handwriting wobbles a little. He attends a concert. He eats pickled herring at New Year's. He watches the West German television through snow, the picture fuzzy, the sound clear enough to catch the tone. He does not defect. He does not denounce less. He goes to the cemetery on All Souls' Day and stands at a stone that has no body behind it because his son has no grave. He runs his finger over the chiseled name. He closes his eyes. There is nothing to report here. The arithmetic of grief is not subject to party discipline. It is a private ledger with no audits. His Stasi file in 1976 contains a note that he is zuverlässig, jedoch gesundheitlich eingeschränkt. Reliable but limited by health. He is given fewer tasks. Younger informants replace older ones. The machine modernizes. The envelopes continue. The truth remains a packet handed along. Across the inner German border, another arithmetic is underway. In the West, trials for Nazi crimes occur with breaks and starts. Frankfurt, 1963–65, the Auschwitz trials. Witnesses testify. Judges speak. Newspapers print. The narrative shifts. The children of the perpetrators ask questions their parents do not answer. A new school book includes a photograph from a camp without softening. Another excludes the photograph of the cathedral bombed to rubble. Memory rebalances. In East Germany, veterans of the communist resistance are honored. Streets are named. The word Bürgerrechtler has not yet entered common speech. The Stasi continues its math. It draws its map of trust and danger. It brings ordinary people into extraordinary suspicion, one file at a time. Karl writes in his notebook fewer lines, but they sharpen. I am not innocent. I am not a monster. I am a function. It is not a cry. It is not a plea. It is a sentence like a ledger line. He knows its truth and its evasion. He cannot place the words in an envelope because there is no proper addressee. He keeps them. People like him built both states. They are the civil. They are the men and women who came to desks each morning and made entries in books so that the larger machines could move. The mathematics of guilt in their case becomes a study of fractions. How much blame does the 1% of daily collaboration carry compared to the 100% of those pulling the levers? The academic answer depends on discipline. The human answer depends on the day one is asked. A Bundesarchiv record contains a remark from an Allied officer that could be the caption for 2 generations' experience. Germany must become ordinary. Ordinariness is the final arithmetic. It is the slow convergence towards daily patterns of work, school, Sunday, vacation. It is the act of forgetting as public health. It is the act of remembering as private injury. In many towns, memorial plaques in the 1950s and 1960s show only dates and the words Den Toten, to the dead. They do not say who killed whom. In the 1980s, stones appear in some places for victims by name. In the 1990s, after the archives open, new stones appear for those watched and those who watched. The arithmetic of commemoration shifts again. The numbers on the plaques do not end debates. On 4 November 1989, 500,000 people stand on Alexanderplatz. They shout, Wir sind das Volk. We are the people. Across the country, Stasi officers feed files into shredders. The noise is a new kind of artillery. Papers fall like snow. The old arithmetic gets torn into confetti and then glued back together by archivists and historians with patience instead of authority. Karl is 78. He is not in the square. He watches on television. He does not go to his desk again. He does not hand anyone an envelope. But the envelopes he handed earlier begin to be opened by people he never saw. The Stasi records agency sends letters to those named in reports. His cover name appears in a footnote. His real name appears in an index. He writes his last line in the notebook in winter. The room smells of coal and old paper. He writes, "I handed over truth. It always came back to me." Then he underlines the sentence with a weak hand and closes the book. He dies in 1992, a year after reunification. His grave has a stone. His files have call numbers. People like him have become case studies, examples in seminars, quotes in monographs, silhouettes in documentaries with steady narration and slow pans over typewriters. The immediate aftermath is memory now. Rubble-hopping women turned grandmothers. Ration cards turned cardboard bookmarks in cookbooks. Cigarettes turned back into vices. The Hunger Winter is a chapter in a school book with photographs in black and white. The displaced persons camps are museum exhibits with archival footage on loop. The denazification questionnaires sit in folders. The Spruchkammer categories are a paragraph in an exam that students memorize and forget. But the arithmetic that marked Karl's life does not vanish when the numbers do. It remains in the muscle memory of those who learn to calibrate speech to the nearest risk. It remains in the bureaucracy that knows how to request a confession by request for cooperation. It remains in the seat of a man at a desk who hears a joke spoken too loudly and thinks first in forms, not in morals. A documentary voice reads the record, then turns to the camera with the cool compassion of someone who has read too much to condemn and not enough to absolve. It speaks of the routine heroism of women with baskets and the routine cruelty of men with envelopes. It speaks of the slight shift of the hand that writes a truth and the larger shift in a state that receives it. It could end with a moral. It does not. It ends with a sentence in a notebook on a desk in Halle. In my life, truth has always been something I hand to someone else in an envelope. For Karl, the front line after 1945 ran through his memory and his paperwork, not across a battlefield.